Hi guys, hope everyone's well and welcome back to the Improvement Podcast. So you may notice I am in a bit of a different environment from usual in today's episode. So first podcast I am recording in a new place. For those that haven't seen on my Instagram, I have recently bought my first property, which has been a super exciting and great step, and something that's been super beneficial not only from like a obviously being able to live with my partner, which is brilliant, but just from like a productivity point of view. It's been super, super helpful having my own office, having my own space, not having to commute to my partners, etc., and being able to just cultivate a productive routine and environment from areas like meal prep. It's been brilliant just being able to like batch cook certain foods in larger quantities and just set up my day a bit more favorably, sorry, to how I would like it. So it's been brilliant so far, and I'm pretty settled in. We've been here for around about a month and a half. And yeah, with the podcast, you've noticed or you may not have, but I kind of bulk record quite a few episodes at once at times, just so I can get them out on a regular basis because I can't always rely on being free that week for like recording a podcast, just with how busy work can be and how much like things can fluctuate in terms of like getting a few inquiries in one week, for example, and having quite a lot of clients to start up. So I just like to be nice and organized and prepared and get things done in advance in that sense. So in this episode, I'm going to touch on how you can train in a busy gym environment. So not everyone's blessed with being able to train at the perfect time or the time that suits themselves best, and they need to be a bit more adaptable and work around their work commitments. And as a result, that can sometimes end up with them training at a time where the gym is pretty busy and pretty chaotic. And as a result, like it can be quite disruptive to the quality of your session. So I'm gonna go through how I would navigate and what I personally do if I had to if I had to train at a gym at peak times, and how I'd go about it while still getting a productive training session in. So of course you'll have your initial plan, hopefully, that you'll have in place. You'll have your program that you'll typically follow. And with that plan you have in place, what I typically do is have like backup options for each movement. So, for example, if certain machines are in use, if there's a certain movement you can't perform, have alternatives that you have in your program. Although it is favorable having consistent movement patterns we perform on a week to week basis, it is also important being adaptable because we can't always rely on kit being free. We can't always rely on things being perfect in terms of our session order. So, have backup movements that you can perform, and ideally like those backup movements, don't make them ones that are super complex and high skilled movements. Like if you can, let's say, have a chest press, you can jump on, if you're typically used to doing like a different chest press or a Smith machine press, that can be a good option because sometimes like with like a dumbbell press, a barbell press, because there's a lot of skill involved in it, you will go on to it after not doing it for a while and you'll be like Bambi on ice. You'll be all over the place. You'll really struggle to create stability. Whereas if we can opt for a movement that is already in quite a stable environment, then it'll be easy to just jump on it straight away and get quite a good stimulus from the get-go without needing to go through those neurological adaptations. In other words, get used to the skill of the movement pattern. So I'd look to kind of have backup options for each movement, and also see in your program, if there's movements that you can never get on, take them out. Like if you can never get on them anyway, maybe opt for movements that you know you can consistently perform. Like although some people might argue like a dumbbell press might not be optimal for whatever reason, if someone can consistently do a dumbbell press in their training environment, if that yields better enjoyment for training, if that yields a quicker session and less time taken away from sleep, if that yields less stress, then that is optimal in their circumstance. What's optimal goes well beyond like where an exercise is heavier, like, or how stable an exercise is. There's or how much range of motion you can get. What's optimal goes way beyond that, as I touched on. So that's something you can think about, is making sure you've got movements you can repeat on that week to week basis and have backup options. And what I'd do is see if there's certain movements you can't necessarily perform, and you've got the backup options, logbook them, because it means when you go back to then needing to do those other alterations, you've still got numbers to compare from. And like I'm someone who I like doing the exact same thing in the gym. I'm very meticulous in that sense. I like doing the same lifts, logbooking them, progressing them over time. But just remember, like we're chasing stimulus, so it's not going to be the end of the world. Like years from now, you're not going to look back and think, oh, I've not made progress because I needed to do a dumbbell press instead of a chest press one time. Yes, we don't want to be chopping and changing lifts, but at the same time, you're still going to get a good stimulus from it, and that's ultimately what we're chasing. So don't lose too much sleep if you need to change things slightly. The stress of needing to change things is probably worse than the the change itself. And with the like movement patterns, what I'd recommend you do is if you need to swap things, make sure you just swap it for movement patterns that are pretty similar. So make sure you're not swapping like it's quite an obvious point, but don't swap like a flat chest press, a horizontal press for a vertical press. Don't swap a chest press for a shoulder press variation. Just try and equate the same volume, in other words, the same amount of work, the same amount of sets on a movement that is pretty similar and will hit similar muscle groups. So that's what I recommend doing there. And obviously, like when we are performing different movements, we might not have numbers to compare from, or initially, unless you have that backup movement you've been logbooking. How do we know we're getting a good stimulus? So the best way to know we're getting a good stimulus is if we're training in a close proximity to failure with good accuracy and execution, then we know things are going to be in a good spot. We know we're going to benefit from that movement itself. So making sure we're on the ball for tempo or form or effort, and then you're not rushing your rest periods, and you know you're going to get a productive work in there. And also something you can look to do is you can always ask to work in with others. So obviously it depends where you train, how comfortable you are with whoever's on the machine. But what I'll often do, like see if I'm waiting on a bit of kit, I'll just ask like, have you got much sets left? And usually like it gives you an indicator if it's worth waiting on that bit of kit, or if they say like don't be pushy with it, just ask, be kind when saying it. But when you ask, just ask so you know if you should jump on something else or if it's worth waiting about. Because if they've only got one set left, it's worth waiting a minute or two. Or if they've got like 4 sets left, you can ask to work in. Or alternatively, it then gives you an indication, right, let's swap to a different movement. Let's jump on something else because I can't be waiting about all day to get on that machine. So that's what I'd look to do. Just ask to work in with someone. And usually it speeds them up. Like if you ask how much sets you got left, and he's like 2, and like, all right, no worries. They know you're waiting, so they'll speed up. I'm not saying pressure them or intimidate someone. You definitely don't want to do that. But it just because sometimes you can probably be guilty of it yourself. Like you don't know someone's waiting on the back kit, and you're just like you're just not going for the motion in terms of your effort, but you're just in a bit of a daydream. You're taking longer than you necessarily need in terms of your rest periods between sets. So that's what I recommend doing in that sense. And if anyone's got basic etiquette, they'd probably let you work in if you'd ask. And what you can look to also do is try and avoid peak times if you can. So I know obviously everyone's got different work commitments, but if you can maybe look to time your training before work, that could be a good idea so that you can go when you're physically and mentally fresh at the start of the day. You don't have any interruptions on. You've probably got more energy, and then the gym's going to be quieter, so the training quality could be in a better spot. So you could look to get to bed earlier and then get up earlier and try and get that session in a earlier time frame. So that's what I'd look to do there. And we can also consider with the training time side of things is if, let's say, it usually gets busy, let's say you finish work at 4, usually find your gym gets busy at around like 5:30. Maybe instead of like going home, eating a meal, getting changed, getting a few things done, maybe try and like eat as soon as you finish or just before finishing work if possible, depending on your job, and then immediately go straight to the gym. See if you can skip that rush time. You can also consider going after peak times, but then you're training in a close proximity to bed, your sleep quality could be poorer, so that could impact things in that sense. So I just be mindful of that. But ideally, if you can, avoiding the peak times could be a great shout in that sense to keep the session quality nice and high. And also, like we can think about like what gym we're training at. So if there is other gyms available, then you could look to change training facility even if one's not quite as well equipped or it's a little bit further. If it means the quality of your training's greater, then that could be a good shout. And what you can also consider is tailor your program to movements you can get on. So if you find typically like certain movements are free, granted they're still good movements that you feel like you get a good stimulus out of that, the quality of those movements are high, you could maybe look to tailor your movements around that. So if there's always like a shoulder press that's never really in use, but the Smith machine always is, then opt to put the shoulder press in your plan, because even if on paper it's a tiny bit percentage less optimal, if it's something you can repeat on a consistent basis, week after week, that is then in your case optimal. So that's what I'd look to do in that sense. Try and make your training sessions based around what kit you can consistently get on can be a great idea. And I'd also consider like using again like cable movements, dumbbell movements, barbell based lifts for some of your lifts in the gym. And the reason being is they're typically a bit easier to get on. Obviously, gyms will differ, but usually it's a bit easier to get a set of dumbbells rather than get on like a specific machine, especially if it's one in high demand. So that's something you can consider there. And with or another tip as well is see if you need to like be adaptable and change your order, do so. Like again, going back to how do we know we get a good stimulus? By training hard and close to failure with good form. So if you need to change the order around, you're doing the leg press before the squat, you're doing the calf raise before your compound movements, that's fine. To go for it. What I'd recommend you do is if you do need to change your order, look to think and see what's going to be the least impactful for your ability to measure and track progress lift to lift. What I mean by that is if, let's say, you've got a calf raise last in your exercise order on your leg session, right? And then before that, you've got, let's say you're waiting on the leg extension, or we'll say a squat, sorry. Let's say the leg press is available, you could do your lunges, but you could do calves, and maybe the calf machine's usually in use. Start with calves, because then that's going to have a less of a knock-on effect on your ability to track and measure progress on your other lifts in your plan, because in reality, like doing your calf work's probably not going to accumulate much fatigue, and it's probably not going to take away from subsequent lifts. Same with things like the adductor. And what I recommend you do is when you are swapping movements, put a wee note on your logbook, depending on you use your notes on your phone, your pen or paper, your Google Sheets. Uh, Regardless of what you're doing, just put a wee note on what order you done it in, so you can at least know why maybe you got less reps, got more reps in the subsequent sessions, subsequent weeks. So that's what I recommend there. And also, just don't let the fact that you need to change your order like reduce what actually matters most, with which is your intensity. Like, as if you're training hard and your accuracy is good, you're gonna get a good stimulus. So try and have kind of peace of mind there. It's very easy, like especially when you logbook your lifts and you do so like on a consistent basis, then yeah, it can be easy to like stress over when you can't do it in the same order. But you don't lose sleep. You know what I mean? You're gonna make progress. It's not the end of the road there. And we can also consider things like performing like antagonist paired supersets. So if, let's say, the gym's extremely busy, you've got a bench, you've got a set of dumbbells, you could look to like do things like a chest supported dumbbell row and superset that with like a like low incline dumbbell press or an incline dumbbell press. So by superset, I don't mean you immediately need to go from one exercise straight into the other, but what I do mean is do one set on an exercise, rest a couple of minutes, wait until you're ready, do the other, and kind of alternate between the two. Or if you, let's say, have a Smith machine and let's say you've got a low incline Smith machine press, then you've got a back movement, and then you've got a high incline Smith machine press. You can just opt to get all your work in on the Smith machine while you have it. Obviously, bear in mind other individuals will want to use the kit as well, but just bear that in mind, and try and structure your session away so if you've got a bit of kit that you want to use, maybe stay on that for the duration of the session. But yeah, the biggest thing is really to be adaptable, because that's what's going to yield results long term. Just being able to train hard, do your sets in a close proximity to failure, and progress them over time. And just make sure, like, just remember the basics. So when we can't compare progress, just think about what the fundamentals of an effective movement will be. So pick a movement where it is relatively stable. You can get a pretty large range of motion, it's got tension throughout the majority of the rep. Or the range of motion, that's what I recommend doing there. And also, another tip is see if you're training in a gym and you've got, let's say, cable work in your program, opt for movements that don't require both cables. Typically, it's quite difficult if your gym's not extremely well equipped to get on 2 cables at once. So what you can consider instead of like doing a dual arm cable curl is do a single arm cable curl, do a rope hammer curl, perform a easy bar curl instead of performing like a lat pull down on the cable stack. If you've only got one lat pull down, opt for using a bench and doing a single arm lat pull down. That can be a good option there. Opt for like a single arm rear delt fly, and that will just allow you to kind of have appropriate exercise selection where you're still getting a good stimulus, but it's not hard to get on. So there, like you can look at the structure of like a training session. It could be, let's say, you could structure your upper body day like instead of doing let's say a line cuff lateral raise requiring both cables, then a specific chest press, then a specific shoulder press, and then maybe you're using like a row machine that you struggle to get on, and then after that you're performing, let's say, a lat pull down on the machine, and then cable work where you require both cables. Instead, you can think about doing a dumbbell lateral, which is pretty easy to get a hold of. You could then opt for like a low incline dumbbell press. After that, you could follow it up with like a high incline dumbbell press. Then you could opt for like a single arm pull down on a cable station, and then you can opt for a barbell row. And then after that, you can do like a dual arm dumbbell curl, or sorry, a high incline dumbbell curl. That's a brilliant movement you can do. That's pretty stable. It's got good resistance start to finish, and it'll train your bicep in its lengthened position. And you can then look to follow that up with like a lying dumbbell skull crusher, which is another good variation. Or if you have got on the cables, then perform like a superset of like a rope hammer curl, a rope overhead extension. So that can be a great shout there. And also, like, if you do have a coach, communicate with them that you do really struggle to get on certain bits of kit, because that can maybe influence decision making when it comes to programming. Like I touched on, you could potentially make those adjustments there. So hope the video helps. And just to give you a quick recap, go in with like a plan of what you'll do. Go in with some alternative movements you might consider. Like, don't be afraid to have that flexibility. Just logbook what you do so you can know what to do the subsequent weeks if you do ever need to replace that exercise again. Don't be afraid to ask to work in with others. Consider supersets, and consider like when you're doing cable work, using using like individual cables and movements that only require individual cables. We can also consider things like, again, like barbell work, dumbbell work a bit more heavily as well. And yeah, just pretty much like asking to work in and not being afraid to be adaptable in that sense. So hope the video helped and you got value from it. If you want to see any other topics covered, then please let me know. If you did enjoy the episode, then if you could share it on your Instagram story and tag the Improvement Podcast and tag myself, that would be massively appreciated. Be sure to drop me a follow on Instagram if you don't already. And thank you very much for watching and listening.